when you talk about the impact on the broad economy here, I mean, do you think that people will be able to do that they will be able to keep going forward? Or do you think that there's some kind of a drag here on the broader economy from this kind of activity, especially if we see more of it?
The one incident I don't think will. I do think that leadership will encourage everyone to be resilient, to still say, you know, the worst thing we can do is let fear overtake us. You know, your second point, if it happens again and again, I do think what will be called to question is to what degree people feel comfortable that we're taking as many precautions as we can to prevent one of these from happening. But and this is not meant to be political. This is just meant to be a fact. I think as these happen, leadership comes to light. And with the right leadership, it will not impact us. I mean, we will rally, we will move forward. But it does require that we, from a leadership standpoint, collectively, that everybody say, we're not going to let this impact us.
All right, let's talk about some good news.
Yeah.
At 8:30 this morning, we got a brand new jobs number out, up 211,000 jobs. That beat expectations of, I think, 190,000. We've seen a series of very good job reports throughout the year. Unemployment relatively low now. What do you make of that? Does that track with what you're seeing in your own businesses?
It's not what I'm seeing in our businesses. And we do have, first off, our largest business in agriculture would not track with the general economy, so that would not be a good proxy anyway. But in our construction equipment business and our turf business, they do track with the general economy, and we're still not seeing it at the level that we're talking about here. When I've had a chance to talk with policymakers, it still feels very, very fragile from an economy standpoint. And the interesting thing with the jobs number is you really want to know what was the jobs number that they reported here 2 months from now, which is the corrected jobs number, and
right.
Where is it at? But you know, it's obviously it's good that it's up, but you know, participation rates down. We would just say that overall, right now, we think we're in a very fragile situation, and maybe it's up on the margin, but it's not up in a significant way that it would be able to absorb any type of shock whatsoever.
Okay, and speaking of shocks, the Federal Reserve is out there poised to do something possibly this month. Pretty much everybody we've talked to suggests that they expect a rate increase this month. It's been, what, nearly 7 years of near zero interest rates in this country. What have you done to plan for that shift? And do you think that there might be a shock to the economy if the Fed moves? There's a lot of nervousness here because it's been a long time since we've seen a rate increase like that.
And you know, I certainly don't have the answer, and when I've had a chance to talk to individuals associated with the Fed, you know, I think they're in a damned if they do, damned if they don't situation. They obviously they need to raise rates. If they don't, they just put uncertainty back in the market. The unfortunate part, and the overall economy at this point in time, in my opinion, while it's still very fragile, could absorb small rate increase. Probably the biggest negative right now is with the dollar so strong vis-a-vis any currency around the world, it will have a negative impact on exports. We see it, a lot of other people that export see it. And so that's the challenge they're going to have. I think what I have at least articulated when I've had a chance to talk to them, what's more important than raising rates, which they need to do, is provide some clarity as to what will happen after this rate increase.
Right. I mean, we've seen Janet Yellen say that what matters more is not just the single rate increase, but the path on which the Fed is. Are they giving you any kind of intelligence on where they're going after this?
No, I wouldn't.
And if they did, could you give it to me?
Yeah. No, they're not. But I would say that the Federal Reserve members that I get a chance to talk to fully appreciate that. Now, how that gets played out is another story, but I think everyone understands that more important than the first rate hike is the signaling they give relative to Is this going to be a continuous every 3-month process, or is this something that we're going to raise and then we're going to take a hold pattern for a period of time?
So what do you do in your own business to prepare for this? I mean, obviously it's going to affect all kinds of financial instruments around the world. Are there steps you have taken or you will take to adjust to a slightly new world here, starting possibly in December?
I think we would not be doing our job if we didn't. I think any business like ours, what I say is you always have to prepare for the worst, and then if it gets better, that's a good thing. And we actually, it's a couple different things that we end up doing. You've got our equipment manufacturing side of the business. That's a little easier to prepare for on this, because the impact is, okay, what might this do to selling of construction equipment, ag equipment, et cetera, and that's an easier way to react. You just get a little more aggressive on saying, well, we're going to keep schedules down right now, and then if things get a little better than what we think, we can always move it up. We're probably more challenged. We've got a $40 billion credit company as well, and there we're always on the market for medium-term notes, things like that. So you try to go ahead of time to anticipate that and say, let's get a little bit more commercial paper out there. But you know that when it happens, your cost of borrowing is going to start going up a little bit more.
Right.
And then the question becomes, how do you translate that into the market in terms of when do you put pricing increases in, et cetera. We're always working on that. This on the margin is not the biggest issue. Whether what we talked about before would be a much bigger issue you're trying to prepare for. There's other things that we deal with would be much bigger, but clearly we are trying to assess and then take steps to counter what will eventually be a higher cost of borrowing.
But you think ultimately the Fed has to move. They can't stay on zero indefinitely.
In my opinion, they're already past. They should. They need to move. Just to take the market right now, I think, is overreacting every time that they don't make a move to raise rates. So, in my opinion, a rate increase would be good, especially if they could provide clarity of how they're thinking about it then going forward.
Feels a little bit, though, like we've gotten kind of addicted to these low rates. I mean, there are people, young people in their careers who've been doing this for a decade, can barely remember a time when interest rates weren't zero. Is there a psychological piece to that, shifting off of that?
I think without a doubt, depending on when you grew up, there's a great book way back when by a gentleman, Morris Massey. You are what you were when, and it all talks about the time that you grew up, whether you were Great Depression, this is how it influenced your life, those different periods of time. I think there's no doubt that the generation that's coming through this right now has been influenced by the low rate environment. And my own opinion is it's still going to stay low rate. It's not going to go. In the 80s, I dealt with 13 and 17% interest rates. I don't see that coming at this point in time.
Not in December, anyway.
Not in December. So, I think it's still going to be, relatively speaking, low rates. And I think people will be able to adjust. I mean, we're talking, if they raise it 25 basis points or 50 basis points, that's not going to make a major difference in how people think about their environment. So this is, I think, more of a long-term issue, not a one-time deal.
I don't want to monopolize all the questions here. I know we've got some microphones around the room. I do want everybody in the room to have the opportunity to ask a question, but I'm the moderator, so I get to ask a few more. But think of some questions, because I will come out to the room here in a second. And also, I don't have a time clock up here, so if somebody can let me know when we hit the end. Oh, there we go. Okay. I do have a time clock up here. So I'll know when we're getting the hook. Usually they're shouting in my ear, and I just, they say rap, and I rap. But I want to talk about your business a little bit. I'm told that you guys have increased investment in R&D by almost 77% in the past decade. Is that right?
Yeah.
That's a huge amount.
Right.
What drives that? What are you looking to do?
So it's 2/3 driven by the government and 1/3 driven by what we want to do. So
How do you mean by the government?
So EPA legislation relative to engine emission has been on a path since 1996 to continue to require stricter and stricter air regulations. And as a result of that, all of us that are in the engine business, and we're one of the largest engine producers, have had to really spend a lot of R&D dollars on driving technology to create cleaner and cleaner engines. Now, the good news about that is, compared to 1996, today, the engine that we're producing, 99.99% of the emissions has been eliminated.
Wow.
And in fact, an engine today, anywhere in the world, not just in New York City, but a Tier 4 engine that was in the middle of the desert would be kicking out air that's cleaner than the air it's taking in. That's the positive side, but it has taken a lot of R&D effort to get there. The other third of what we've done is because we've been trying to grow a lot globally, so we've capitalized on the engine side of what we had to do, and we've invested a lot of R&D to grow around the world. And a lot of that is both because there's an opportunity to grow around the world, but equally important is we fully understand that if we're not growing in those areas, there's people over there that are going to try to grow in our areas. And so part of it is also a countermeasure to assure that we can compete on other soils so that we can even compete better when they come to our soil.
I want to ask you if those regulations frustrate you, but before I do that, let me open it up to the room and just see if we have any questions here, because we're down to 5 minutes, and I want to make sure that we have an opportunity for people to weigh in, and I don't hog all the time here. But if I don't see any other questions, what I'll do is ask you, when you talk about that regulatory burden and getting to 99.9% more efficient, does that, as a leader, frustrate you? I mean, that's money that you can't spend somewhere else. We saw Volkswagen recently decide,
Right.
You know what, to heck with it, we're going to cheat.
Yeah.
We think these regulations are fundamentally illegitimate. It must have been the calculation in their minds, and they cheated. Does that frustrate you as a leader? What do you do?
Well, this is not exactly what you asked, but the first thing I'll tell you what frustrates me is that the company would cheat.
Yeah.
Because that creates a negative perception on all companies. And one of the first things that came out right after that is, okay, you're in the engine business. Why are you cheating as well?
Right.
And we clearly, that would not be tolerated in our company. And we've never done anything like that. We never will do anything like that. As long as, I'll give you two parts to the answer. As a member of society, what one has to always ask is the incremental benefit worth what we're achieving? I think at the start of what this journey was in '96, the first 2 or 3 levels, the incremental benefit of what it was doing for society, my own personal opinion was it was definitely worth it. It was, they were forcing technology development, and it was worth it. I think the last couple, I would argue vehemently, have not been worth it. For the last 1%.
You're into the law of diminishing returns here?
Law of diminishing returns. But having said that, as long as the playing field is equal, and what was good about emissions is that the developed world, Japan, all of Europe, all of the US, all had the same set of regulations, and all the companies competing in those areas had to play by that same set of rules. So at least it was a fair playing field. Now, other places in the world, that was not the case, but at least in those areas, it was a fair playing field. So I would probably say that incrementally, the last couple of emissions levels probably costs a lot more for society than what it's going to generate. But the journey certainly has helped clean up the air, and you can go over road trucks the same way. And You know, you go to a place like Los Angeles today versus 10 years ago, 15 years ago, and you can see it. You can taste it. The air quality is much better than what it was, and while there's other reasons why, but I think a significant portion of that is exhaust emission, both car and truck and off-road equipment.
So we are almost out of time here. We've got 1 minute left. We're sitting here in the shadow of the Capitol building. We've got a brand new Speaker of the House in Paul Ryan, the first Speaker of the House to grow a beard since the early 20th century. So that's new. When you look at that new speakership and you look at what's going on Capitol Hill, and we're in the tail end of a presidency on the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue, what's the one thing that you want out of Washington over the next year?
Over the next year?
Mm-hmm. When a lot of people think nothing's going to happen, even though we have a new speaker.
Yeah. You know, I think since Paul Ryan has taken over, there's been a couple really positive developments, and
outside of the beard.
Outside of the beard, we're about ready to pass a 5-year transportation bill, and which we haven't done now for years. There's been some legislation that is coming through, and the fact that he's been a part of helping bring that through, that's all I'd like in the near term, is that the tax reform and all that can wait for the next time, but let's not have a debt crisis. Let's not have a debt crisis. Let's go ahead and fund the government, get a couple of these passed that we can pass. If we can get that level of stability in here, that'll be a lot better than what it's been the last couple of years. And
so you're an optimist.
I happen to. I'm a big Paul Ryan supporter. So I am. I think he embodies everything you want in someone that's a politician. He's there to serve, and I think he does it with a level of integrity and commitment that, I think given the dynamics of the House and the Senate and who's in there and who's in the majority and everything else, I think he could make a difference during this last year, and I am an optimist.
Great. Well, that is probably a terrific place to end it. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.
It's a fascinating conversation. Thank you.